Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Better on Purpose. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been listening for a little while now, thank you for continuing to come back and for spending this time with me. Today's conversation feels especially reflective. Not because I have some perfectly polished conclusion or because I suddenly figured everything out overnight, because as I've said before, I definitely haven't. But because there have been a lot of reoccurring emotional themes surfacing in my life lately that seem to keep pointing me toward deeper patterns. And this conversation is coming from a mix of experiences, shifts, grief, relationships, community dynamics, old wounds and new wounds, and they've been surfacing across multiple spaces in my life lately. Some are connected to family, some to friendships, some are connected to community, and some to environments where there's been deep love and deep emotional difficulty existing at the same time. What's been interesting is realizing how the same emotional patterns can quietly show up across completely different spaces, even among people who don't know each other and whose lives never intersect, which is what started making me realize this probably isn't just about one situation or one person or people group. It's about patterns. I think sometimes life has a way of exposing emotional patterns when enough situations start pressing on the same internal bruise. And lately there have been several moments where reactions felt emotionally bigger than the situation itself. Not always irrational, but at times it very well may have been. Not necessarily dramatic, just deeper. Like the nervous system was responding to more than what was happening right in front of it. And I remember having one moment recently where someone I care about simply felt quieter than usual. Nothing major had even happened. Outwardly, I may have looked completely normal to most people, although if you know me closely or have been around me in person for any length of time, you may have sensed something felt a little off. But internally, I could feel my mind immediately trying to make sense of everything, replaying interactions, reading into tone, trying to determine whether something had shifted relationally. And the more uncertain things felt, the more I could feel my nervous system reacting to that uncertainty like it needed clarity quickly in order to feel emotionally steady again. And I've caught myself in the middle of that spiral, realizing, wow, a lot of times my body still responds to uncertainty like it's danger. And honestly, that realization felt emotional, which is common for me. Reactions like that can easily get interpreted as caring deeply, loving hard, being emotionally invested. And part of that genuinely is true. There are people who naturally love deeply, who care deeply, who value connection and emotional presence very highly. I'm one of them. But I also think fear can quietly weave itself into the way people love without them fully realizing it. Closeness can start to feel synonymous with safety without someone realizing that, especially when emotional connection becomes the compass someone subconsciously uses to determine whether things feel okay. So when communication shifts, when energy changes, or someone suddenly feels more distant than usual, the nervous system can react almost immediately. Not always outwardly, sometimes very quietly. Sometimes it just looks like overanalyzing, replaying interactions, reading tone more carefully, trying to determine whether something relationally has shifted. And that's what's difficult about recognizing these patterns, is understanding how survival responses can slowly become intertwined with personality over time if they're never examined closely, especially when those patterns started developing very young. Because when someone grows up emotionally adapting to unpredictability, tension, where closeness like felt connected to emotional safety, the nervous system starts learning, stay aware, stay connected, stay emotionally attentive, and eventually those responses stop feeling like survival instincts. They just start feeling like, this is who I am. Hyper-awareness feels normal. Overanalyzing becomes second nature. Emotionally preparing for shifts becomes automatic. A person can become incredibly good at reading rooms, reading tone, reading the subtle changes in people's energy. And oftentimes those qualities get praised. You're so thoughtful. You are super emotionally aware. You love your people well. And honestly, those qualities genuinely are beautiful. Deeply caring is beautiful. Emotional attentiveness is beautiful. And so is loving people well, which is why this conversation can feel so complicated, because the goal isn't to become less loving or less relational or emotionally detached. The goal is learning how to recognize when genuine care slowly becomes entangled with fear, fear of disconnection, distance, or that automatically means that something is wrong, fear that closeness is the only thing keeping someone emotionally steady. And that can be difficult to untangle because many people who develop those patterns really are deeply loving people. This isn't about becoming colder. It's about learning how to remain soft-hearted without constantly living in emotional survival mode. Learning how to love deeply without feeling like closeness is the only thing holding that person steady. Something else that's been really interesting to reflect on is how unfamiliar peace can feel when a nervous system has adapted to emotional unpredictability for a long time, because logically, peace is what most people say they want, right? I've said that over and over and over for the last several months. Consistency, healthy communication, steadiness. But emotionally, calm can almost feel suspicious at first when the body spent years bracing for shifts. Like part of the mind is still waiting for disappointment to show up eventually. And I think what can feel really confusing is realizing that chaos didn't necessarily feel good. It just felt familiar. There's a difference. One of the hardest parts about healing is realizing that self-awareness does not automatically stop emotional reactions. Someone can intellectually understand a pattern and still emotionally struggle with it in real time. There can be awareness around where certain fears come from or how old wounds show up in present relationships, around why certain situations feel emotionally activating. But in the middle of feeling emotionally overwhelmed, that clarity can disappear real quick. And suddenly it doesn't feel reflective anymore. It just feels emotionally consuming. And that's the part that can feel discouraging sometimes, because there's this thought of, if this pattern is visible now, shouldn't it already be easier to navigate? But healing doesn't seem to work in perfectly linear ways. Sometimes awareness develops first and emotional regulation catches up more slowly afterward. Honestly, I think a lot more people experience that than they admit, or maybe they haven't even realized it yet. Something else that's been surfacing lately is the difference between emotional closeness and emotional safety, because they're not always the same thing. Someone can genuinely love another person and still activate unhealthy patterns in them. Not maliciously or intentionally, but relationally. And that realization can feel difficult because boundaries often get interpreted as rejection or distance or withholding love. But boundaries are not always about pushing people away. Sometimes they're about recognizing which dynamics pull someone away from themselves. Sometimes they create healthier breathing room inside relationships. Sometimes they protect love from quietly turning into resentment over time. And there's a huge difference between becoming bitter and becoming more intentional. I also think conversations around healing can become very black and white online sometimes. People want clean categories: healthy, toxic, victim, villain. But most relationships are much more complicated than that. People can deeply love each other and still unintentionally affect each other in painful ways. People pass down emotional patterns they may not even fully recognize in themselves yet. And maturity sometimes looks like learning how to acknowledge experiences honestly without needing to completely demonize everyone involved. That balance matters. I can't emphasize enough that friendship, support, connection, those all matter deeply. Healthy relationships add so much value to life, but I don't think becoming healthier emotionally means becoming less relational. Part of healing is learning that worth, identity, emotional stability, they can't rely entirely on whether every relationship around someone feels steady all the time, because we are human. Relationships, human. Communities, human. And when emotional safety depends entirely on external reassurance or constant relational steadiness, life can start feeling emotionally fragile all the time. And part of growth is learning how to remain grounded even when certain relationships feel uncertain, not detached, not numb, not uncaring, just steadier internally. This is still something I have yet to master. Some days those patterns are easier to recognize. Other days they show up halfway through reactions that feel incredibly familiar. But maybe growth looks like catching it sooner. Healing isn't perfection. Maybe it's awareness and reflection, pausing long enough to choose differently sometimes, even in small ways. And maybe part of becoming better on purpose is learning how to love deeply without losing yourself in the process. Learning how to create safety instead of constantly chasing it for yourself and for the people around you. Thanks for being here for another conversation that felt a little vulnerable, a little reflective, and honestly very human. Growth can be really uncomfortable sometimes, but awareness creates the opportunity for things to change little by little over time. If any part of this episode connected with something in your own life, I hope it encourages you to approach yourself with curiosity instead of shame while you're growing through it. None of us navigate these things perfectly. We just keep learning a little more as we go. See you next time, friends.